My name is Laura Sullivan. I am 68 years old, a retired bank clerk, and a widow. For most of my life, I lived in quiet routines, saving every receipt, balancing checkbooks, clipping coupons, making sure my family had what they needed. I thought the sacrifices I made would be honored one day, that when age arrived, love and respect would shelter me. Instead, what I received was betrayal from the very person I gave everything to. The diamond ring was the only keepsake my late husband Thomas left me. He had bought it in 1974 after working months of overtime. On our wedding day, he showed it to me with pride. "This ring," he said, "will mark our journey." From that moment on, he wore it every single day, through scorching summers, freezing winters, moments of joy, and seasons of hardship. That ring stayed on his hand like a silent witness to our marriage. He never once removed it until the night he collapsed at work and never came home. At the hospital, the nurse placed his wallet, his watch, and that ring in a small plastic bag. When they handed it to me, my world split open. That small piece of gold with its modest diamond was all I had left of him. I began to treat the ring like a talisman. Every morning before I poured my coffee, I would hold it in my palm, feeling the indentation of his life against my skin. Every night I set it beside my bed, whispering a good night as if he were still there. It gave me the courage to wake up to another day in an empty house. So when one evening I reached into the porcelain dish on my dresser and felt only cool emptiness, my stomach dropped. I searched frantically, pulling open drawers, scanning the floor, even checking the laundry basket. The ring was gone. Fear twisted in my chest. I rushed into the kitchen, where my daughter Sarah was sitting with her phone. She was scrolling, smiling at something on the screen, as if the world were light and simple. "Sarah," I asked, my voice already shaking, "have you seen your father's ring? It was in the dish this morning." She barely looked at me. Instead, she let out a sharp sigh and snapped, "Stop complaining!" I sold it to pay for my vacation. Her words slammed into me harder than any physical blow. For a second, I thought I had misheard. I waited for her to laugh, to tell me it was a cruel joke, but she did not laugh. She only shrugged and added, "You don't need it, Mom." It was just sitting there. I'm going to Cancun next week, and we needed the money. Just sitting there. Those 3 words burned. To her, it was nothing more than an old piece of jewelry gathering dust. To me, it was Thomas's presence, the single tangible proof of 43 years of life together. My hands gripped the counter to stop them from trembling. My mouth tasted bitter, metallic, as if a copper coin had been pressed against my tongue. Betrayal has a flavor, and in that moment I tasted it fully for the first time. I wanted to scream at her, to demand she give it back, but my throat locked. Instead, I whispered her name. She stood, grabbed her purse, and walked out the door. No apology, no flicker of remorse. The house fell silent, a silence so heavy it pressed against my ribs. I sat there for hours, staring at the empty space on the dresser, feeling my body stiffen with disbelief. The ring had survived decades of labor, storms, even Thomas's death, only to be sold by my own daughter for a plane ticket and cocktails by the beach. Then the phone rang. At first I thought it was Sarah calling back, perhaps with regret. But the voice on the line was deeper, older, carrying a tone of wary concern. "Mrs. Sullivan? This is Grant Harper. I own Grant's Pawn and Loan on 5th Street. Your daughter brought in a diamond ring today. I thought you should know. When my staff inspected it, we found something unusual. Ma'am, you will not believe what we uncovered inside that ring." I froze, gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles whitened. The kitchen clock ticked loudly above me. My reflection in the dark window showed a pale, aging woman whose world had just shifted twice in a single day. First, my daughter had betrayed me. Now a stranger was telling me that Thomas's ring held a secret I had never known. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breath. My hand still smelled faintly of dish soap. The air was thick, unmoving. My heart pounded in my chest like it wanted to escape. I whispered to myself, "Thomas, what did you leave behind?" That night, I realized the ring was never only about memory. It was a message. And that phone call was the beginning of a truth I never expected to uncover. Before I share what came next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by the person you raised, the one you thought would protect your dignity when you could no longer fight for yourself? Have you ever watched your child trade your love for their greed? If you have, you will understand my story. Stay with me, because what began with heartbreak in a quiet kitchen would turn into a revelation that changed everything. The moment I set the phone back on its cradle, Grant's words echoing in my ears, my mind slipped backward, carried by memory to a church on a humid July afternoon in 1974. The pews were filled with neighbors, cousins, and friends who had brought food for the reception because we could not afford catering. The windows were open and the faint hum of cicadas mixed with the sound of an old piano playing a hymn. I was 20-something, nervous, clutching a bouquet of daisies Thomas had picked himself that morning. When I reached the altar, Thomas looked at me with eyes that seemed both terrified and certain. His hands were calloused from construction work, his shirt collar a little too tight. He opened a small velvet box. Inside were 2 rings. One was a plain gold band meant for me, simple and practical. The other was a modest diamond ring, the one he had worked extra shifts to buy. "This one," he whispered, his voice trembling just enough for only me to hear, "is for me. I will wear it every day so I never forget what I promised you today." With steadying breath, he slid the gold band onto my finger. Then, with a hint of pride, he placed the diamond ring onto his own hand. From that day on, he never removed it. It became a symbol of our life together, worn into his skin by time and love. That image never left me. For more than 4 decades, whenever I saw the glint of the diamond on his hand as he drank his morning coffee or brushed sawdust from his hair after work, I was reminded that he carried me with him everywhere. That ring was not merely jewelry, it was his vow made tangible, a circle of promise bound to both of us. Remembering that moment always softened the long nights after his death. I could close my eyes and see the young man he had been, nervous and hopeful, placing the ring on his hand as if sealing a covenant. That memory warmed me like sunlight breaking through clouds. But as I opened my eyes to the present, that warmth collapsed into cold reality. The ring, which had lived on his hand and then rested with me as the only piece of him I could still touch, was now gone. Worse than gone. It had been sold by our daughter, Sarah, as though it meant nothing. Sarah, my only child, the baby I once sang lullabies to in the middle of the night, the girl whose bruised knees I kissed after bicycle crashes, the young woman I prayed for during exams and heartbreaks. Somewhere along the line, that girl had vanished, replaced by a woman who looked at me not with love, but with impatience. Since Thomas's death, Sarah's tone toward me had shifted from cool to cutting. At first I told myself grief had hardened her, but soon I realized she saw me as a weight holding her back. She began pressing me to sell the house, to move into a smaller apartment, to give up the things Thomas and I had built together. "You don't need all this space," she said more than once. "You're alone now. It doesn't make sense." Beneath those words was the sting of dismissal. "You are old. You are in the way." Adam, her husband, never contradicted her. He sat at our dining table, polished and smug, speaking as if he were offering wisdom. "Sarah's right, Laura," he would say, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. "Life should be simpler at your age. Too many old possessions only drag you down. You should let go." I remember one particular evening, the 3 of us sitting around that very table. Adam spoke casually about the cost of vacations. "Airfare has doubled," he said with a chuckle. but everyone deserves a break." Then he glanced at Thomas's ring on my finger, his eyes narrowing with a glimmer of calculation. "That diamond could probably cover a week or two at the beach." He said it like a joke, but I caught the seriousness in his gaze. Sarah's lips curved into a faint smirk, her silence a quiet agreement. I ignored it then, convincing myself that my daughter would never reduce her father's memory to a travel fund. But the truth was already there, unspoken, waiting for the right moment to strike. Now, standing in the kitchen with the memory of their smirks haunting me, the contrast between past and present was almost unbearable. I saw Thomas's trembling hands at our wedding, the shine of the diamond as he slid it onto his own finger. Then, layered on top of that, I heard Sarah's sharp voice telling me to stop complaining, as though my grief were an annoyance. I pressed a hand to my chest, whispering, "How did we get here, Thomas? How did our daughter grow into someone who sees us as obstacles instead of anchors?" The house answered with silence, a silence that pressed down heavier than bricks. I thought of every sacrifice we had made, late nights at the bank for me, overtime at the construction site for him. I thought of every vacation we skipped so Sarah could have braces, new clothes, or a chance to join her school trips. All of it had built her path forward, and now she had sold our past for cocktails in Cancun. The sweetness of our wedding memory curdled into sorrow. What had once been a bright image of devotion was now pierced by betrayal. Yet within the ache, I felt something stirring, a quiet strength, an ember of determination glowing through the grief. If Sarah and Adam believed I would surrender quietly, they had misjudged me. That ring may have been sold, but its story was not over. Thomas had hidden something inside it, and I would find out what it was. That night, for the first time since Thomas's death, I felt more than sadness. I felt resolve. The betrayal of my daughter had carved me open, but it also revealed a truth. I was no longer simply a widow lost in mourning. I was a woman about to discover just how much strength still lived in me. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been shallow and broken, filled with images of Thomas's hand, the diamond ring flashing in sunlight, and Sarah's sharp voice tearing through the memory. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee untouched in front of me, staring at the business card I had written down after the phone call. Grant's Pawn and Loan. The name itself felt heavy, like a gate I was afraid to walk through but knew I must. By mid-morning, I pulled on my coat and forced myself into the car. The streets of our neighborhood were familiar, yet that day they felt foreign, almost hostile. As I drove, I caught glimpses of children rushing to school and shopkeepers unlocking their doors, fragments of normal life moving forward while mine felt stuck in betrayal. When I turned onto 5th Street, the pawn shop appeared between a liquor store and an old laundromat. Its neon sign flickered in the pale daylight, casting a sickly green glow on the cracked sidewalk. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old metal. Glass cases lined. The walls filled with guitars, watches, and trinkets that once meant something to someone. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, giving everything a washed-out, ghostly look. Behind the counter stood a man with a weathered face, graying hair cropped close, and eyes that studied me with both caution and recognition. His name tag read, Grant Harper. "You must be Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of unease. "Your daughter warned me you might show up." I froze. "She told you?" Grant nodded. "She said you were sentimental about the ring. She said you might cause trouble trying to get it back. I want you to know I don't usually call family in these situations. Business is business. But when I held that ring, something told me it was different." My throat tightened. "Is it still here?" He shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry. A buyer came in early this morning, paid cash. Once an item leaves, there are no returns. That's the rule." The room tilted slightly. It felt as though Thomas was being stolen from me all over again. First by Sarah's betrayal, and now by a stranger walking somewhere in Chicago with his ring on their finger. Seeing my distress, Grant cleared his throat and lowered his voice. But before it sold, my assistant noticed something unusual. We always clean and examine items carefully. When we did, we found a hidden compartment inside the band. I blinked, unsure I had heard him correctly. A hidden compartment? Grant reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small manila envelope. This was inside. I shouldn't be giving it to you since the ring's already gone, but the handwriting, well, it seemed personal. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded and yellowed with time. My breath caught as I recognized the careful handwriting immediately. It was Thomas's. He had always written in neat, deliberate strokes, the kind of penmanship no one teaches anymore. At the top of the page, he had written a date, July 15th, 1974. My wedding day. Beneath it, in his firm, unmistakable script, were the words, the day I knew I would marry Laura. I pressed the paper against my chest as tears blurred my vision. I whispered, "Oh, Thomas." The memory of that day, his nervous smile, the daisies in my hands, the way the world seemed full of promise, flashed vividly before me. And now, decades later, he had hidden this note inside the very ring he wore every day, waiting for me to find it when I needed it most. But below those words was a string of letters and numbers. SS4457CH0815DS. My tears dried quickly, replaced by confusion. It looked like a code, too precise to be random. My mind raced, trying to connect the sequence to anything familiar. Bank numbers? A password? Some kind of account? I stared at the paper until the digits swam before my eyes. "What does it mean?" I whispered. Grant leaned on the counter, shaking his head. "I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you this. The buyer, the man who purchased the ring, asked specifically about recent watches and rings that came in. He seemed interested, almost too interested. When my assistant mentioned there was something unusual about the diamond band, he perked up real quick. He wanted that ring, not just any ring. The hair on the back of my neck rose. Someone had been looking for Thomas's ring, not because of its monetary value, but because of what was hidden inside. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my purse, the words at the top echoing in my mind like a heartbeat. The day I knew I would marry Laura. That sentence, simple yet powerful, was the first echo line in my journey. It tied me back to the young bride I had once been and the promises we had made. But beneath its tenderness lurked something darker. Thomas had hidden a code, a secret he had never told me. For 43 years he had carried it silently. And now, through betrayal and loss, I was left to uncover why. As I stepped out of the pawn shop, the sunlight felt harsh against my face. The city noises around me blurred. All I could think was that the ring, the only keepsake Thomas left me, had carried more than memory. It carried a truth I was not sure I was ready to face. I drove home from the pawn shop with the envelope burning in my purse, the paper inside whispering louder than any voice. The numbers, SS4457CH0815DS, kept replaying in my head, clattering against each other like coins dropped onto a tile floor. They were not random. Thomas had never written anything without reason. For 43 years of marriage, he kept meticulous records, neat files stacked in the wooden cabinet in our bedroom. Every bill, every receipt, every tax form. He filed them away with a discipline that sometimes irritated me but always reassured me. And now, those files were calling me. As night fell, I sat at his desk surrounded by dusty folders and thick binders. The lamp cast a small circle of light, leaving the rest of the room in heavy shadow. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, but inside, I felt the air thick with questions I did not yet know how to ask. I pulled open drawers, flipping through decades of papers, bank statements, mortgage records, retirement accounts. Nothing matched the numbers on that slip of paper. I whispered the code under my breath like a prayer. SS4457CH0815DS. My voice cracked, the sound trembling in the silence. I spread the papers across the desk until they covered the surface like a map of a life built carefully, brick by brick. Still, nothing. Exhausted, I leaned back and closed my eyes. That was when the memory returned. Thomas sitting at this very desk late at night, his glasses slipping down his nose, scribbling something in his small notebook. He always said he was balancing accounts, but sometimes I caught a flicker of secrecy in his eyes, a shadow he quickly hid with a smile. At the Yamao time. I told myself it was my imagination. Now I wasn't so sure. I reached for his old notebook hidden at the back of the drawer. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed at the edges. As I flipped through, my heart jumped. There, on the inside cover, scribbled faintly in pencil, was a name I had never noticed before: Secure Solutions Investment Management. My pulse quickened. The initials matched the first two letters of the code, SS. My fingers shook as I turned back to my computer. The website was plain, clinical, the kind that tried to hide in the shadows of the internet. The login screen stared at me, asking for a client number and password. I stared back at the slip of paper Thomas had hidden in his ring. The sequence seemed to fit the format of an account ID. I typed it in carefully. SS4457CH0815DS. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen shifted. Valid client number. My vision blurred with sudden tears. The page now demanded a password. My hands hovered over the keyboard, frozen. What would Thomas have chosen? I tried our wedding date. Denied. I tried my birthday. Denied. I sat there, my chest tight, until I remembered the words he had written at the top of the slip. July 15th, 1974. The day I knew I would marry Laura. I typed 071574. The screen blinked. A pause. Then two words appeared that made the world tilt beneath me. Access granted. I inhaled sharply, the sound echoing in the small room. My fingers pressed against my lips as tears blurred my vision. The screen refreshed, loading lines of text, numbers, and columns. My eyes darted to the balance line at the top. Current account balance, $2,547,029.67. I gripped the edge of the desk so tightly my knuckles whitened. $2.5 million. Hidden. For years. While I clipped coupons, while we skipped vacations, while Thomas mended old clothes instead of buying new, this fortune sat quietly in a place I never knew existed. The emotions rushed in all at once, colliding until I could barely breathe. Anger first. Fury that he had kept this from me. Fury that I had worried over bills, over retirement, over whether we would manage, while he secretly built a fortune. I thought of arguments we had over grocery lists, the way he scolded me for buying name-brand items. All the while, he was protecting a secret account worth millions. But then, grief mingled with that anger, softening it in ways I could not ignore, because along with anger came awe. He had saved, invested, hidden, and planned. For what? For me? For Sarah? For reasons I had yet to uncover. He had worn the ring every single day, carrying not only the symbol of our marriage, but also the key to a future he never told me about. I sat back, my shoulders trembling, my mind reeling between betrayal and devotion. "Thomas, why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked into the darkness. The lamp flickered and the silence pressed in heavier than ever. The glow of the balance stared at me from the screen, unrelenting, almost taunting. $2.5 million. It was the kind of number that could change everything, but instead of relief, it filled me with dread. because I knew this was not just money. It was a message, a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. That night, as I finally shut down the computer and folded the slip of paper back into my purse, I realized my life had split in two. The past, Laura, who believed she understood her husband and her daughter, and the present Laura, staring at a future laced with secrets, betrayal, and a fortune she never asked for. And deep inside, beneath the anger and grief, a single question clawed its way to the surface. What had Thomas been preparing me for? The glow of the computer screen still lingered in my eyes when the phone rang. It was nearly midnight, the kind of hour when calls bring only bad news. My heart lurched as I reached for it, my hand trembling. On the caller ID, one word glared back at me: Sarah. I hesitated. After everything she had said, after selling Thomas's ring, part of me wanted to let it ring into silence. But a deeper instinct urged me to answer. My voice was unsteady as I whispered, "Hello?" Her tone was not the casual indifference she usually reserved for me. It was sharp, almost frantic. "Mom, did you find something inside Dad's ring? Tell me the truth. Don't lie to me." My breath caught. How could she possibly know? "Why are you asking me that?" I said carefully, trying to keep my voice calm. "Because," she snapped, "I know there was something hidden." "That ring wasn't just jewelry. You've been digging around in Dad's things, haven't you? You found something, didn't you?" Her words pierced through me like cold steel. In that moment, I realized Sarah's betrayal had not been impulsive. It had been deliberate. She hadn't sold the ring only for money. She'd been searching for what Thomas left inside. And somehow, she already knew more than I did. I swallowed hard, gripping the phone tighter. "Sarah, your father's ring was sacred. It was his life. Why are you speaking about it like this?" She gave a harsh laugh, bitter and unkind. "Sacred? Don't be naive, Mom. He hid something in there. Money, documents, something valuable. You don't understand. Just tell me what you found." I closed my eyes, anger mixing with heartbreak. And what if I did? What if there was something? There was silence on the other end, long enough for me to hear her uneven breathing. Then she whispered, "Then you'd better not keep it from me. I have a right to it. I'm his daughter." Her words struck me with a pain even sharper than before. Not a word about love, not a word about memory, only possession, only greed. "I think you should get some rest, Sarah," I said quietly, my voice trembling but firm. "This conversation is over." I hung up before she could respond, my chest heaving as though I had run miles. I sat in the dark, the slip of paper from the ring resting beside me. Thomas's words etched deep into my heart. The day I knew I would marry Laura. That line, tender and pure, was now twisted by the reality of my daughter's hunger for whatever secret Thomas had left. I tried to sleep, but the night stretched endlessly. Every creak of the house made me jolt awake. My mind replayed Sarah's frantic tone, her insistence, her entitlement. She knew, and she would not stop. By morning, I had convinced myself I might have imagined the urgency in her voice. Maybe she would cool down. Maybe I was exaggerating. But when the doorbell rang just after 10, my body stiffened. Through the frosted glass, I saw 3 silhouettes. I opened the door slowly. There stood Sarah, her face tight and pale. Adam beside her with his arms crossed in smug confidence. And between them, a man in a tailored suit holding a leather briefcase. His hair was neatly parted, his smile polished but hollow. A lawyer. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan," the man said smoothly. "My name is David Palmer. I'm here representing your daughter and her husband." My pulse thundered in my ears. Representing them for what? Sarah stepped forward, her eyes flashing with urgency. She tried to disguise as concern. "Mom, we just want to help you. We know you found something in Dad's ring. We thought it would be best if we handled it together. with legal guidance so nothing gets complicated. Her words hung heavy in the air, poisonous in their sweetness. Adam added, "We're just trying to make sure everything is done properly. You don't want to make a mistake with something so important." I tightened my grip on the door frame, the weight of betrayal pressing harder than ever. They had come prepared, armed with a lawyer, ready to corner me in my own home. I looked at each of them, my daughter's desperate eyes, my son-in-law's calculating smirk, the lawyer's empty politeness. And in that moment, one truth became clear. They would not stop until they had taken everything Thomas had meant for me to protect. I straightened my back, meeting their stares with silence. Inside, my heart cracked, but beneath the crack, something stronger was forming. "Why don't we step inside?" Sarah said, her voice falsely gentle. "We have papers for you to look over." Her hand moved to the briefcase, the lawyer already pulling it open. And just like that, the war had come to my doorstep. I led them into the kitchen, the place where Thomas and I had shared countless meals, arguments, and laughter. It felt almost sacrilegious to let them stand there now, their briefcase and polished shoes contaminating the space that still carried his presence. The lawyer set his papers neatly on the table as though he were preparing for a corporate meeting. Sarah sat down across from me, her eyes scanning every corner of the room like she owned it. Adam hovered near the counter, his arms folded, that smug expression still stamped across his face. "Mrs. Sullivan," the lawyer began, his voice silky and rehearsed, "we've drawn up some simple documents, nothing to worry about. This is a power of attorney agreement. By signing, you allow Sarah and Adam to manage your financial matters temporarily, just until you've had time to grieve and regain clarity." The word temporarily rang in my ears like a cruel joke. He slid the stack of papers toward me, the pen resting on top like a dagger waiting for its target. Sarah leaned forward, her voice sweetened with artificial concern. "Mom, this is for your own good. You don't need the stress of complicated finances. Let us handle everything. That's what family is for." Family. The word twisted inside me. Family was what Thomas and I had built, what we sacrificed for, what that ring symbolized. And now the same daughter who had sold it for a vacation was asking me to surrender everything Thomas had worked to protect. Adam spoke next, his tone dripping with condescension. "You've done enough, Laura. You carried the load for years. It's time to let the younger generation take over. Just sign, and all the worry disappears." I looked down at the papers. Lines of legal jargon blurred before my eyes, but I understood their essence. Signing meant handing over my life, my independence, my husband's final act of love. I placed my hands flat on the table, feeling the cool wood beneath my palms. My breath steadied. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The lawyer cleared his throat, waiting. Sarah tapped her nails impatiently. Adam smirked, certain victory was close. Finally, I pushed the stack of papers back across the table with a single deliberate motion. The pen clattered against the pages, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the floor, and walked toward the living room. At the doorway, I turned back, my voice low but steady. "Thomas left everything for me," I said, my eyes locked on Sarah's. "Not for the greedy." The words cut through the air like a blade. Sarah's face flushed crimson. Adam opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand ever so slightly, silencing him without another word. The lawyer began to stammer, "Mrs. Sullivan, you must understand." But I did not answer. I simply turned my back, stepped into the living room, and with one final act, I closed the door between us. The slam echoed through the house, reverberating like thunder. I stood on the other side of the door, my chest heaving. For once, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel like the widow clinging to memories. I felt like Thomas was standing beside me, steadying me as he once had. Silence became my armor. I didn't need to argue or scream. My refusal, my dignity, spoke louder than any fight could. Behind the door, I heard the shuffle of papers, muffled whispers, and Sarah's angry hiss. Adam's voice was lower, trying to soothe her, but his words never reached me. The lawyer's footsteps moved toward the exit. After a few moments, the front door shut with a sharp click, leaving me alone in the quiet once again. The house was still, but it was no longer heavy with defeat. It was charged with something different: strength, resolve, a quiet power I hadn't known I still possessed. I walked to Thomas's photograph on the mantel, pressing my fingers lightly against the glass. "They thought I would give in," I whispered. "But you knew better, didn't you? You knew I'd have to stand." I sat in the armchair by the window, the same chair where Thomas used to read his newspapers, and let the silence settle. I wasn't naive. I knew Sarah and Adam would return. They wouldn't give up so easily. But tonight, in the quiet of my own home, I had claimed something they couldn't touch. Power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the act of pushing away a pen. Sometimes it was choosing silence over shouting. Sometimes it was closing a door and refusing to let anyone in. And in that silence, I felt the faintest echo of Thomas's voice. "You are stronger than you think, Laura." 2 days passed in uneasy quiet. I avoided Sarah's calls, each one coming with increasing frequency and venom. Adam left a message about unfinished business, his voice low and controlled, but I could hear the frustration underneath. I tried to steady myself with small routines, watering the plants, folding laundry, brewing tea, but everything felt brittle, as if one wrong move would shatter the fragile peace. Then on the third morning, the phone rang again. This time the voice was not Sarah's. "Mrs. Sullivan? This is Grant Harper from the pawn shop. I think you'll want to come down here. Something's happened. The man who bought your husband's ring, he came back, and he's asking for you." I gripped the receiver, my pulse quickening. "He came back? Why?" Grant hesitated, then said, "You'll see. Just come." The drive to 5th Street felt like sleepwalking through fog. My hands clutched the steering wheel, knuckles pale against the leather. When I stepped inside the shop, Grant was waiting near the counter. Beside him stood a tall man with silver at his temples and a calm authority in his posture. He wore a dark coat, and in his hands he held a small velvet box. "Mrs. Sullivan," the man said, his voice steady but gentle. "My name is Richard Torres. I used to serve with the Chicago Police Department. Thomas and I were friends for over 30 years. I stared at the box. My throat tightened. You bought the ring?" He nodded. "Yes. Thomas asked me a long time ago to keep an eye on certain things if anything ever happened to him. When I saw that ring appear at Grant's shop, I knew it was time." My knees wavered. Grant pulled a chair forward and I sank into it. Richard stepped closer, placing the velvet box on the counter in front of me. His expression was serious, respectful. "This belongs to you, Mrs. Sullivan. Thomas wanted to make sure it would find its way back to your hands." With trembling fingers, I opened the box. The ring gleamed up at me, familiar and heavy with memory, but Richard leaned forward and pressed a small catch I hadn't noticed before. With a soft click, a second hidden compartment slid open. Nestled inside was a tiny micro SD card. For a moment, I could not breathe. My voice shook. "Another secret?" Richard nodded. "Thomas was careful. He wanted to protect you." Back home, I placed the card into my laptop. My fingers hovered, almost unwilling to move. Then the screen filled with a single video file. I clicked play. The image that appeared made my heart lurch. Thomas sat at his desk, the same desk where I had spent nights searching. His face looked tired but resolute. His voice, when it came, was steady, yet I could hear the weight behind it. "If you are hearing this, Laura, it means Sarah has fallen. It means the daughter we raised has chosen greed over love. And if that is true, then I cannot shield you by my presence anymore. but I can still protect you." I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears springing to my eyes. His voice filled the room, rich with the cadence I had memorized over decades of marriage. I placed evidence in safe places, records of debts, fraudulent loans, and conversations I overheard. I recorded everything, Laura, not because I wanted to believe the worst, but because I had to prepare for it. If Sarah and Adam try to take what is yours, you will not be alone. This card contains proof, enough to stop them, enough to keep you safe. I leaned forward, the words wrapping around me like both a shield and a blade. My own daughter, my own blood. And Thomas had known. He had carried the burden of that knowledge silently, preparing for the storm while still smiling across the dinner table. The video continued. "I am sorry I could not tell you while I was alive. I wanted your days with me to be filled with peace, not suspicion. But I knew the danger was real, and I knew one day you would need strength greater than your grief. Laura, you are stronger than you believe. Remember that. And remember, everything I built for you." The video ended, the screen fading to black. I sat frozen, the room around me spinning, Thomas's words echoing in the silence. "If you are hearing this, it means Sarah has fallen." I whispered his name through tears. "Thomas, why did you have to carry this alone?" But even as grief surged, I felt a quiet resolve solidify inside me. He had trusted me with this truth. He had prepared me not to crumble, but to stand. The ring sat on the desk beside me, heavier now than it had ever been. Not just a keepsake, not just a symbol. It was a key, a vault of secrets, and the final message of a husband who had loved me enough to fight battles in silence so I would not have to face them unarmed. And now, with Sarah and Adam circling closer, I knew I would have to use what Thomas had left me. The glow of the laptop screen threw long shadows across the room. My hands hovered over the mouse, reluctant, terrified of what else Thomas had hidden inside that tiny card. The video had already broken my heart, but the folder labeled evidence demanded to be opened. I clicked. Dozens of files appeared, neatly organized, PDFs, audio clips, scanned documents, all cataloged with Thomas's careful precision. I opened the first file. It was a report from a private investigator, stamped and signed. The words blurred at first, my eyes unwilling to believe, but then they sharpened into daggers. Client, Thomas Sullivan. Subject of investigation, Sarah Mitchell and Adam Mitchell. I felt the air leave my lungs. I kept reading. The report detailed gambling debts Adam had accumulated at offshore betting sites. Over $150,000 in unpaid balances. Credit cards maxed out. Loans taken under false pretenses. And Sarah, my daughter, my only child, was listed as complicit, signing papers she knew were fraudulent, her signature right there on the scanned images. I whispered, "No, not my Sarah." But the documents kept coming, transfers between their accounts and shell companies, debts hidden under layers of lies, notes from the investigator, pattern of financial instability, high risk of attempting to exploit family resources, repeated discussions regarding mother's estate. My chest tightened as I scrolled further. Then I found the audio files. My hand trembled as I clicked play. At first, static, then voices, Sarah's voice, my Sarah. "We just have to be patient," she said, her tone cold, calculated, a voice I barely recognized. "Once Mom is declared incompetent, everything becomes ours. The house, the accounts, all of it. She won't even know what's happening." Adam's voice followed, low and smug. "I told you it'll work. The lawyer said it's straightforward. We just need a few more people to believe she's slipping." And then Sarah again, sharper, crueler. "It's not like she'll fight back. She's old, fragile, she'll fold." The words echoed in my ears, bouncing against the walls of my heart until they cracked. I felt my knees weaken. I pressed both hands to the desk to steady myself, but the strength was draining fast. The room felt darker, the lamplight dimming as if the shadows themselves had thickened. The sound of Sarah's voice, my little girl who once called me Mommy in the night, now scheming to erase me, filled the air until it was unbearable. I closed my eyes, but the words would not stop. Once Mom is declared incompetent, everything becomes ours. I could see her face in slow motion, the way she looked as a child blowing out birthday candles, as a teenager slamming her bedroom door, as a woman walking down the aisle in her white dress. Each memory overlapped with the voice on the recording, cruel and unrecognizable. Tears slid down my cheeks, hot and relentless. I whispered into the silence, "How could you, Sarah? How could my own daughter wish me erased?" The room spun. The clock ticked loudly, but even that sound was drowned out by the echo of her words. My heart pounded like a drum, each beat carrying betrayal deeper into my bones. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the shadows above shifting like dark waves. The edges of the room blurred as though time itself had slowed. My ears rang with Sarah's voice, repeating the sentence over and over until it felt carved into me. Once Mom is declared incompetent, everything becomes ours. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation, an attempt to strip me of my dignity, my memories, my very self. For a long time, I sat frozen, paralyzed between heartbreak and fury. The silence after the recording stopped felt heavier than the words themselves. I realized then what Thomas had known. He had seen this coming. He had borne the weight of it in silence, leaving me the tools to fight when I was strong enough to face the truth. I pressed the ring to my lips, the metal cool against my skin. "You knew, Thomas, and you tried to shield me." The tears kept falling, but beneath them a spark of resolve flickered. The betrayal was real, the evidence undeniable. My daughter had chosen greed over love, deception over family. And now I knew the truth no one ever thinks they will face. Sometimes the greatest danger does not come from strangers, but from the very blood you gave life to. In that dimly lit room with Sarah's voice still echoing in my ears, I understood one thing clearly. The battle was no longer about a ring or even the money. It was about my right to exist, to remain whole, to refuse being erased, and I would not let them erase me. I knew it was only a matter of time before Sarah and Adam came back. Betrayal has a way of circling like a predator. It does not retreat, it stalks. And sure enough, 3 days later, I heard the knock at my door. When I opened it, there they were, Sarah, Adam, and the same lawyer with his polished smile. "Mom," Sarah began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "we really don't want this to get ugly. But if you don't cooperate, we'll have no choice but to file a petition declaring you incompetent. You'll lose control of everything. This is your chance to make it simple." Adam stepped closer, his tone hard. "The court will side with us. We have proof you've been making erratic choices. Do you really want to be humiliated like that?" For a long moment, I said nothing. I let their words hang in the air, the same air Thomas had once filled with laughter and love. Then I lifted my chin. My voice was calm, steady. "You may try, but you will not succeed." The lawyer smirked, pulling a set of documents from his briefcase. "We'll see what the judge thinks." 2 weeks later, we were in court. The wood-paneled room smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The judge sat high above, her eyes sharp, her patience thin. Sarah sat at one table, her face composed into a mask of innocence. Adam sat beside her, whispering into her ear. Their lawyer stood ready with his arguments, and I was not alone. On my side of the room sat Grant Harper, the pawn shop owner, his arms folded firmly across his chest. Next to him was Richard Torres, broad-shouldered, his presence carrying the weight of a lifetime in law enforcement. They had agreed to stand with me to testify to the truth. When the judge called the case, Sarah's lawyer rose with smooth confidence. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mrs. Sullivan has demonstrated concerning behavior. She is fixated on old possessions, imagining conspiracies, and engaging with shadowy accounts. We are deeply worried about her mental fitness. For her own protection, her daughter seeks power of attorney." I sat still, letting him paint his picture of me as fragile, unstable. But then my lawyer, provided through contacts Thomas had arranged years ago, stood and spoke with quiet force. "Your Honor, what you are about to hear is not the story of a confused widow. It is the story of a woman targeted by her own family who sought to strip her of her rights, and we have evidence, undeniable evidence, to prove it." At that cue, the first file was presented. The private investigator's report, stamped, signed, irrefutable. Page after page laid out Adam's gambling debts, the fraudulent loans, the schemes to cover them. I watched Sarah's composure falter, the muscles in her jaw tightening. Next came the audio recording. The courtroom speakers crackled, and then Sarah's own voice filled the space. "Once Mom is declared incompetent, everything becomes ours." A gasp rippled through the gallery. I sat frozen, hearing the words again, but this time not alone in the dark. This time the world heard them too. Sarah's face drained of color. Adam shifted uncomfortably, sweat glistening at his temples. Their lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a sharp glance. Then Richard stood, testifying to his friendship with Thomas, explaining how Thomas had foreseen the danger and prepared this evidence. Grant spoke too, confirming the discovery of the hidden compartments in the ring and the SD card. Their credibility was unshakable. As the evidence piled higher, I felt the tide turning. For weeks I had been the victim, betrayed, cornered, silenced. But in that courtroom, the weight shifted. It was Sarah and Adam who fidgeted, their eyes darting nervously, their lawyer scrambling. Finally, my lawyer handed the judge a summary statement. "Your Honor, this is not about protecting Mrs. Sullivan. This is about protecting her from her own daughter's greed. Thomas Sullivan saw what was happening. He documented everything, and his wife now carries that truth." The judge leaned forward, her expression grave. "I have heard enough. The petition for incompetency is not only denied, but I am referring this matter for investigation of fraud and attempted elder abuse." The gavel struck. The sound reverberated like thunder, final and absolute. Sarah's mask shattered. She turned to me, her face twisted in anger, in desperation. "You can't do this to me, Mom. I'm your daughter." I looked at her for a long moment, my heart aching. Then I said softly, "Thomas left everything for me, not for the greedy." The words rang out with a quiet finality, echoing through the courtroom. Adam tugged at her arm, pulling her toward the exit as officers approached. Their lawyer gathered his papers in silence. His earlier confidence evaporated. As I walked out of the courtroom with Richard and Grant at my side, I felt the shift deep in my bones. Power had reversed. I was no longer the fragile widow at their mercy. I was Laura Sullivan, wife of a man who had loved me enough to prepare for this day, and mother of a daughter who had lost her way, and I was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was silent when the judge returned with her decision. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Thomas's ring warm against my skin. Sarah and Adam were across the aisle, their lawyer whispering frantically, but their faces were already pale, hollowed out by the weight of evidence. The walls of justice were closing in. The judge's voice was steady, clear, and without mercy. After reviewing the evidence, including financial documents, investigator reports, and recorded audio files, This court finds Sarah Sullivan guilty of financial fraud and elder exploitation. She's hereby sentenced to 3 years in federal custody, with restitution payments ordered to her mother, Laura Sullivan, totaling the value of misappropriated assets and debts incurred. The words hit like a gavel to my chest. 3 years, federal prison, my daughter. The judge turned her gaze to Adam. Adam Miller, this court finds you guilty of aiding and abetting financial fraud and attempting to coerce unlawful guardianship. Your sentence is 2 years probation with a suspended prison term, a fine of $50,000, and permanent prohibition from working in financial services. The gavel struck once more, final and echoing. For a moment the room held its breath. Then Sarah crumbled. She bent forward, sobs ripping through her chest, her hands clutching her face as if she could hide from what she had become. The tears stained the very hands that had signed fraudulent papers, the same hands that once reached for mine as a little girl when she was scared of thunderstorms. Adam's reaction was colder. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, his eyes sharp with fury. He muttered curses under his breath, glaring at the judge, at me, at anyone who dared hold him accountable. But even in his anger, I could see the fear in his posture, the humiliation pressing down like chains he could not break. I sat still, my body trembling though my face remained calm. Inside, a storm raged. This was my daughter, my Sarah, the child I had carried, the girl whose scraped knees I once kissed, the young woman I helped dress for her wedding day, and now she was a convicted criminal. This is my daughter, I thought, but she chose money over love. She chose greed over family. She chose betrayal over trust. The tears welled, but I did not let them fall. I could not afford to shatter, not here, not in front of the world. Instead, I let the silence fill me, the silence that had become my strength. The bailiffs led Sarah away, her cries echoing in the chamber. "Mom, please, Mom, say something. Please don't let them take me." Her voice tore through me, each syllable slicing deeper than the last. But what could I say? What words could heal the chasm she had carved between us? The courtroom watched, waiting for me to answer. I simply lowered my eyes and whispered, "Thomas left everything for me, not for the greedy." The whisper carried, soft but firm, and it silenced the room. As Sarah was escorted out, the weight of her sobs trailing behind, a moral question clawed its way into the air. Should a mother forgive? Should she cling to blood even when blood turns venom? Or should she sever the ties, cut the cord, protect herself at last? I did not know. My heart ached with the conflict. The maternal instinct screamed for mercy, for some path to redemption. But the scars of betrayal whispered caution, warning me that forgiveness might only invite another wound. I walked out of the courthouse with Richard by my side, Grant a step behind. The press swarmed outside, flashes of cameras and questions I had no strength to answer. I kept walking, my silence stronger than any statement I could have given. In the car ride home, I stared out the window, watching the city blur into gray streaks. My chest was heavy, but not with defeat, with reality, with truth. The world now knew Sarah's sins. The law had spoken. But in the quiet of my soul, another battle remained, whether to see her as my lost daughter or only as the woman who tried to erase me. As I turned Thomas's ring around my finger, the echo of his words rose again, steady and grounding. "You are stronger than you believe, Laura." I closed my eyes and breathed. The fight in court was over, but the fight within me had just begun. 3 months passed like a slow turning of the seasons. The sting of the trial lingered, but life has a way of softening even the deepest wounds when you choose to keep walking forward. I spent those weeks in quiet reflection, holding on to Thomas's words as if they were a compass. "You are stronger than you believe, Laura." With the settlement money restored and Thomas's hidden account secured, I knew I couldn't let the fortune become a monument to bitterness. Thomas never intended for wealth to rot in secrecy. He meant for it to protect, to build, to give. So with the help of Richard and a trusted lawyer, I established the Thomas and Laura Foundation, a scholarship fund for underprivileged students in Chicago. We started small, just enough to support a handful of young people, but the purpose behind it filled me with a sense of peace. Each check written, each opportunity given, felt like a way of transforming betrayal into hope. The local paper ran a story about the foundation, calling it a gift born from resilience. Neighbors who had once whispered about my supposed fragility now came to me with kindness, offering words of admiration instead of pity. The community began to see me not as a victim, but as a woman who had turned suffering into strength. And for the first time in a long while, I felt whole. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon, as the autumn light slanted golden through the windows, that I heard a timid knock on my door. I opened it to find Emily, my granddaughter, standing there. Sarah's daughter. She looked older than her years, her eyes carrying both her mother's features and a gentleness that reminded me of Thomas. "Grandma," she said softly, clutching the strap of her bag. "I hope it's okay that I came." My throat tightened. "Emily, of course it's okay." She stepped inside, her movements hesitant, as if she were afraid of crossing invisible boundaries. For a moment, we simply stood in silence, the air heavy with unspoken things. Finally, she whispered, "I heard about the scholarship fund. I think it's beautiful. Mom wouldn't want me to say this, but I needed to. I needed to see you." Tears pricked my eyes. "You don't have to choose sides, Emily." But she shook her head, her voice trembling with conviction. "I do, because I know what Mom did was wrong, and I know what you've done is right. I want to be with you, Grandma. I want to learn from you." Her words pierced through the grief that had weighed me down for months. In that instant, Emily became a mirror, reflecting back to me the values I thought I had lost in Sarah's betrayal: compassion, integrity, resilience. She was the living reminder that not all was broken, that love could still bloom in the cracks left by pain. I reached out my hand and she slipped hers into mine. We sat together on the porch as the sun lowered in the sky, painting the world in hues of amber and rose. The air was crisp, the leaves whispering gently in the breeze. For the first time in a long while, silence did not feel heavy. It felt healing. "Grandma," Emily said, her head resting lightly against my shoulder, "I want you to know, I'm proud of you. Everyone talks about strength like it means shouting or fighting, but you showed me it can mean being quiet, standing firm, not letting anyone take away who you are." I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of her words sink deep. This child, this young woman, was the echo of everything Thomas and I had tried to build. Where Sarah had chosen greed, Emily chose love. Where Sarah's voice had once wounded me, Emily's voice stitched something back together. As the light stretched across the porch, I felt Thomas's presence in that moment. I imagined him smiling at us, at the way Emily's hand clasped mine, at the way hope had returned to a house once filled with sorrow. The moral conflict still lingered in my heart. Sarah was my daughter, and I could not erase that truth. But forgiveness is not always immediate. Sometimes it takes the shape of carrying love forward through the next generation. And that afternoon, sitting with Emily, I realized I did not need to resolve everything all at once. Healing could begin in small steps, in shared silences, in hands held beneath the fading sun. The world outside was still uncertain, but in that moment, with Emily by my side, I chose to believe that love, quiet, steadfast love, was stronger than betrayal. The evening sky stretched wide above Wisconsin, painted in soft shades of rose and lavender as the sun slipped toward the horizon. I sat on the porch of my small lake house, the boards creaking gently beneath my rocking chair. Before me, the waters of Lake Wisconsin shimmered, each ripple catching the dying light like scattered diamonds. On my hand, Thomas's ring gleamed with that same quiet brilliance. It caught the sunset as if it were holding the memory of every vow, every laugh, every silent promise he and I had shared. I turned the ring slowly, the familiar weight grounding me. It no longer felt like a burden of secrets. It felt like what Thomas had always intended it to be, a shield, a testament, and a symbol of love strong enough to endure even betrayal. My chest ached, but in that ache lived a strange peace. There are some loves that do not need to be present to remain alive. They protect quietly, invisibly, like wind guiding a sail or roots anchoring a tree. Thomas was gone, yet every preparation he left, every message he recorded, was his way of holding me still. A love like that does not fade. It transforms into strength. I breathed deeply, inhaling the cool scent of pine and water. For so long I had felt caged by betrayal, by the shadow of my daughter's choices. But now, sitting in the calm of this twilight, I realized something profound. Betrayal is not the end of love. It is a fork in the road. One path leads to bitterness, the other to resilience. Tonight, I chose resilience. Sarah's voice came back to me, sharp and cruel, the moment she snapped, "Stop complaining!" Those words had once cut deep, making me feel small, silenced, erased. But now I smiled faintly, shaking my head. I would not carry her words as wounds anymore. I carried them as proof of how far I had come. "Stop complaining," my daughter once told me. And she was right in a way she never intended. I do not complain anymore. I live, and I am at peace. The ring glimmered on my hand, the echo line sealing itself into my soul. As the lake caught the last of the sun's fire, I whispered to the fading light, "Thomas, I hope you see. I survived. I found peace, even in the ruins." For a long time, I simply sat in silence, the kind of silence that no longer felt like emptiness, but like prayer. Emily would be visiting tomorrow, her laughter bringing life back into these walls. The foundation we started was already helping students find their footing in the world. And me, I had found my footing too. Before I close this chapter with you, dear listener, I want to leave you with a question. If you had been in my place, betrayed not by strangers, but by the very blood of your family, would you choose forgiveness, or would you walk away for good? It is not an easy question. It has no single answer. But it is one worth asking yourself, because the line between love and pain is often thin, and it is in that line that we discover who we truly are. And before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or perhaps a late night when stories like this one keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for giving me your time, your ears, and a space in your heart. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes miracles do not knock loudly on your door. Sometimes they wait quietly in the corner of your life until you are ready to open your heart to them. Take care, my friend, and I will see you in the next story.